Hello, everybody. Welcome for this new Council of Europe and University of Strasbourg AI&Law webinar. This is the 8th edition, and we will discuss today about the deep impact of artificial intelligence on human rights. The impact of AI on human rights seems now very well known. We discuss a lot, and we see that today this impact of artificial intelligence is again discussed in several fora and at least in almost all international organizations. And human-centric approach is everywhere. But do we measure exactly the in-depth impact on the society as a whole? This is the objective of the webinar today, and we will try, not maybe to give answer to everything, but at least to open the discussion with the support of an excellent documentary directed by Tonje Ezenshai.
Good afternoon to everyone, and good morning to our speakers from North America. It's great to have so many of you on board for this special edition of the AI and Law webinar. AI and Law Breakfast was our former name. As usual, we have three main speakers. First, we are very happy to welcome the director of the very impressive documentary iHuman, Mrs. Tonje Ezenshai, who's from Norway. Tonje's work focuses on human rights, power structures in society, and current changing relationship between man and machine. She has directed several documentaries, independent documentaries since 1996, and has won many awards, especially for this film, iHuman. iHuman presents the ambitions of three worldwide top researchers in artificial intelligence technology. It questions their work in very acute and in a very acute and human approach, and it opens the door for a deep critical discussion. iHuman was the best Norwegian documentary at Human International Documentary Festival in 2020. And it was also selected for other major international film festivals. Our second expert is Mrs. Nathalie Smoha. Nathalie is a researcher at the KU, University of Leuven in Belgium. She works on ethical and legal questions around artificial intelligence and other technologies. At the European Commission, she coordinated the work of high-level expert group on artificial intelligence, and she regularly advises European and international institutions on regulatory issues relating to AI. Then our third expert, who is also a woman, which we're proud of it, is Professor Karin Johnsley, who is based at University of Quebec in Outaouais, Canada. Karin holds a chair on artificial intelligence on social issues, artificial intelligence and social justice, and she participates to several different projects in prestigious institutions. Among other things, she works on the uses of digital technology and AI social justice, and also on the social responsibility of researchers. She has been strongly committed for human rights with Amnesty International since 2007. Back to you, Yannick.
Thanks a lot. So today we also use a specific tool to allow a little bit of interaction, because of course with this kind of webinar for us, it's always a challenge to try to gather your reaction. So we will use a tool called Slido, and you can connect to that tool by connecting to slido.com, and you use the hashtag iHuman in lowercase. You can ask their question. We will check particularly that chat, and we will launch also some questions to you during the event to gather your view about that. I see that some attendees already used BlueJean in the chat or the question and answer. We encourage you to go to Slido to interact with us. It will be the best thing. And we will just launch now the first poll on Slido.
We will take some questions from the International High School of Strasbourg, Lycée des Pontonniers, from students from this high school. And of course, we will take questions from the chat as it will running after and after.
So it's my pleasure now to allow the opening of this webinar, and I will give the floor, and it's a great honor to have Ambassador Rasmus Lumi with us. He's chair of the TCINF, he's thematic coordinator on information, is the Committee of Ministers here in the Council of Europe. And dear Ambassador, I will give you the floor now to open that webinar, and I will then allow Mathieu Schneider and Amy Shepard to talk just after you. Dear Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Mike.
So we cannot hear you, Ambassador. No. Ouais, c'est bon, là, désolé. We can try again. We see your mic turned off, unfortunately, again, so we cannot hear you. Ouais. Yes. Okay. Dear Ambassador, we will give the word to Mathieu Schneider, and I encourage you to disconnect and reconnect with the same credentials, and I will give you the floor just afterwards.
Mathieu, are you here? Can you take the floor? Mathieu is the Vice President for Culture and Science in Society at University of Strasbourg.
So, Your Excellency, we're hoping to be listening to you in a couple of minutes. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the University of Strasbourg, it's a big pleasure and honor for me to open your webinar on AI and human rights. Since the University of Strasbourg is committed to Europe, because we are not only located in Strasbourg, which is one of the capital of Europe, but we also are a European university. As you know, there was a big program 2 years ago, launched by France and then by the European Commission, on building European universities, and Strasbourg has the leadership of one of these universities. That's why, for us, speaking about human rights and societal issues in the framework of Europe, and more than Europe, because I see that we have speakers from abroad Europe, who are having breakfast, whereas we are having lunch or having had lunch. So it's for us, it's a very it's important to be there, and for two reasons. The first is that AI is nowadays a part of our society, part of our daily life. We have AI in computers, in cars, in mobile phones, in medicine, surgery, defense, police, crime prevention, everywhere. But we also have AI at the university. At Strasbourg University, the most important research unit with more than 600 employees is on AI. The name is iCube, and they work on computer science, data science, imaging, and robotics. But AI is not only in the research unit working specifically on that issue, but it's now a topic for almost every field of science. And I'm very happy that Juliette Lelieur, with a very committed scholar at our university, not only for research, but for many other things, has taken over this change and challenge to speak and do research on AI on the perspective of human rights and law, because AI is not only AI is not a goal, but it's first of all a tool for our society. And if we see that as a tool, we have to keep in the framework of what we think our countries are, and this is democracy. And if we speak of democracy, then we have to defend and prevent human rights. And if we have new tools, we have to adapt them to the context of human rights. That's why nowadays doing research on how the AI impacts on our society, on our behaviors, on our politics and policies is, for me, a very central topic, and not only to me, but it's also for the whole university, and I think for the whole society, a challenge. So I want to thank you, all of you, once again for being there. And we as a university will support your webinars and your research in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Ambassador Lumi, maybe we can hear you now?
Well, let's see. Do you hear me?
Yes, wonderful. We hear you. Very good.
I don't see any difference compared to the previous situation, so I don't really understand what the problem was, but at least you can hear me, which is good. So
please.
Yes, thank you. Artificial intelligence is certainly the topic of the century. And this technology is already part of our daily lives, whether it is our smartphones or applications accessible via the internet. We are already benefiting from services that make our lives easier, whether it is accessing commercial services, searching for information on the web, or interacting with machines. The digital industry will undoubtedly be one of the main drivers of economic growth in the years to come. But there is also public concern. The question of trust is becoming increasingly important in the wake of controversial cases. The use of algorithms to rate students, to assess the criminal risk of individuals, etc. So we need to understand exactly what we're talking about, to distance ourselves from extremely optimistic discourses which see the emergence of an almost universal solution to our problems, from other discourses which are far too alarmist to bring about concrete solutions. Our destiny is our own. It is up to us as citizens to determine the place we wish to give to AI. A measured place, not yielding to fascination, but an obvious place to support us in certain specific tasks. A place where trust is central and where regulation has its place. This is exactly the role of the Council of Europe, which has already been active in the field of information technology. Convention 108 on automatic processing of personal data, or the Convention on Cybercrime are the best examples. In 2021, the work of the Ad Hoc Committee on Artificial Intelligence, CAHAI, will be central. A feasibility study for a legal instrument on AI based on Council of Europe standards is being prepared. I would also like to pay tribute to the work of the director of the documentary iHuman, Ms. Tonje Hessen-Shea. Her film, which has already been acclaimed on many occasions, manages to show us all the facets of this technology, which is as exciting as it is worrying. Finally, we must now think about how best to take advantage of AI from both an individual and a societal point of view in a way that will put the human being back at the center of the debates. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador. And we solved finally this problem. Using technology is always a challenge, even more simple one. And thanks a lot for your patience. Dear Amy, the floor is yours now to introduce you the hot topic of the day.
Thank you so much. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here and to be co-hosting this event with the Council of Europe. I mean, we believe that that storytelling can change policy and can change society. And iHuman is right in the cutting edge of that, this cutting edge technology that is re-transforming society around us. In everything that we do, AI is shaping what we know, what we do, what we even think. And so the film has been described as an eye-opener and one not to miss. But of course, we really want you to see it and to think and to decide for yourselves. And so that's all I'll say at this point. I believe we're going to show the trailer, and then there'll be a few words more from Tonya.
Thanks a lot, Amy, and I will launch the trailer of the documentary just now. Stay tuned.
Humankind as a whole is not the crown of creation. We are setting the stage for something that transcends us. A new form of life is emerging.
Artificial intelligence is rapidly reshaping the world.
It's going to be everywhere all the time. It's going to hear everything. It's going to be connected to every single camera on the planet.
AI will ultimately be the best thing ever to happen to humanity or the worst thing ever. That's why this is the most important conversation of our time.
If we look at what AI is mostly being developed for, it's killing, spying, and brainwashing.
Computer algorithms can reveal our political views or sexual orientation. Privacy is gone.
We as humanity are about to go into a very dark time.
Cyber attacks, fake news, totally automated AI weapons. AI is going to be the most important technology in the history of the planet. Will humans actually benefit?
Think carefully about this. We're basically building a god.
What we are seeing now is like a train hurtling down a dark tunnel, and it looks like we are sleeping at the wheel.
You are live, Amy.
Oh, great. Well, it's my pleasure then to introduce Tonya Hessenshire, the director of iHuman. You've already heard a brief introduction to her. I mean, Tonya has spent 5 years with unique access to the front lines of the AI industry, speaking to all sorts of different experts and some of the brightest minds that are paving the way into our futures. And so iHuman challenges who we are and what's in charge. So Tonya, tell us more.
Thank you so much, Amy, and dear Council of Europe. I just want to start by thanking you for organizing this very, very important webinar. And I'm honored to be here with such awesome experts. And also thank you to the audience. And I can't wait to hear what kind of questions you have after hearing our debate today. I have been working with independent documentary since 1996. And I'm usually really triggered by big international issues. And for the last 15 years, I have been really fascinated by the changing relationship that we humans have to technology. And I got the idea for iHuman when I was working on Drone, my last film that looks at CIA's secret drone warfare. And while I was working on Drone, I started looking into the technology behind autonomous weapons. And I realized that not only is AI changing modern warfare, but it is also changing who we are, it's changing our society, and definitely changing our future. And this was in 2014, and nobody back then was really talking about AI. And yet, somehow this technology was just creeping into our lives without us having a proper debate about the consequences of this, and without us really understanding how AI is developed and implemented in our lives. And for me, facing the most powerful and disruptive and far-reaching technology of our time, one thing is really important, and that is awareness, and that is a good critical debate about what we are facing, just to make sure that we are going the right way. And it is important for me to say I'm absolutely not against AI. I'm consider myself to being kind of a tech nerd and have always been extremely fascinated and inspired by science fiction. But when all of a sudden our daily lives become like science fiction, I think it's time to stop and ask some hard questions. So that's why I made iHuman, and that's also why I'm so thrilled to be part of this global debate right now.
Thank you, Tonya. Well, exactly today is all about a critical debate and asking hard questions. So before we go into that, we have a clip to show you. So Yannick will cue that up.
a large fraction of the digital footprints we're leaving behind are digital images. And specifically, what's really interesting to me as a psychologist are digital images of our faces. Here you can see the difference in the facial outline of an average gay and average straight face. And you can see that straight men have slightly broader jaws. Gay women have slightly larger jaws compared with straight women. Computer algorithms can reveal our political views or sexual orientation or intelligence just based on the picture of our faces. Even a human brain can distinguish between gay and straight men with some accuracy. Again, now it turns out that the computer can do it with much higher accuracy. What you're seeing here is an accuracy of off-the-shelf facial recognition software. This is terrible news for gay men and women all around the world. And not only gay men and women, because the same algorithms can be used to detect other intimate traits. Think being a member of the opposition, or being a liberal, or being an atheist. Being an atheist is also punishable by death in Saudi Arabia, for instance. My mission as an academic is to warn people about the dangers of algorithms being able to reveal our intimate traits. The problem is that when people receive bad news, they very often choose to dismiss them. Well, it's a bit scary when you start receiving death threats from one day to another, and I received quite a few death threats. But as a scientist, I have to basically show what is possible. So what I'm really interested in now is to try to see whether we can predict other traits from people's faces. Now, if you can detect depression from face or suicidal thoughts, maybe a CCTV system on the train station can save some lives. What if we could predict that someone is more prone to commit a crime? You probably had a school counselor, a psychologist hired there to identify children that potentially may have some behavioral problems. So now imagine if you could predict with high accuracy that someone is likely to commit a crime in the future from the language used, from their face, from their facial expressions, from the likes on Facebook. I'm not developing new methods, I'm just describing something or testing something in an academic environment. But there obviously is a chance that while warning people against risks of new technologies, I may also give some people new ideas.
We haven't yet seen the future in terms of the ways in which the new data-driven society is going to really evolve. The tech companies want to get every possible bit of information that they can collect on everyone to facilitate business. The police and the military want to do the same thing, to facilitate security. The interests that the two have in common are immense. And so the extent of collaboration between what you might call the military tech complex is growing dramatically.
The CIA, for a very long time, has maintained a close connection with Silicon Valley. Their venture capital firm, known as In-Q-Tel, makes seed investments to startup companies developing breakthrough technology that the CIA hopes to deploy. Palantir, the big data analytics firm, one of their first seed investments was from In-Q-Tel.
Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, that's it's quite a challenging clip to start that one on, to start this discussion on, because it raises some really potentially uncomfortable questions and points about where AI is sitting and what the technology is being used for, and how the thinking around some of the developments. I mean, show what is possible, potentially giving people new ideas. So to start the discussion here with Tonya. So, you know, iHuman shows lots of things that people don't normally speak about. And so what from your encounters with some of these experts have brought things out into the open that potentially haven't been shown, and how is this shaping the conversation on AI?
Yeah, one of the main challenges making this film was to cut through all the hype and excitement that is surrounding this technology. And in the beginning, I really wanted to go more into the positive impact that AI can have. But then after a while, I started getting really uneasy about this sort of tech orgy that we are part of right now, where everybody is just talking about the amazing possibilities that AI has to help us solve all the problems that we are facing. And yet we are seeing very little as far as these main amazing potential impacts, and we are not addressing and really discussing the ethical challenges that we are facing with AI. So that's what I wanted to do with this film, was to really focus in on the ethical impacts and how AI is also affecting human rights. And that goes from, you know, depleting our privacy, also diminishing equality in our societies, surveillance, and also our human autonomy. Who's really controlling the information and what we know about the world? So for me, this kind of, you know, like most things in our society, comes down to an issue of power and who are in charge of the technology.
Thank you. Well, we're also welcoming Claudia Luciani to the discussion here today. Thank you for joining us, Claudia. And I'd like to come to you next in this question about our destiny and shaping our own destiny through AI. And, you know, we want AI to strengthen democracy and human rights, but AI systems need trust. And so from your perspective, working with Kahai, who do you think should be designing the ethical codes for AI? How can we be making sure that AI really is trustworthy? You are muted.
Natalie.
Can you hear me now? Yes, as you said, at the Council of Europe, our aim in Kahai, but just at the Council of Europe, is precisely that, to help our member states figure this all out. Now, there is a very sobering report that I enjoy very much reading, which is The Automating Society by Algorithm Watch. And there you can see, beyond what Tony was saying is the big hype or the big ideas, what happens actually in our member states, very concretely on a daily basis. And I want to take my own country of origin as an example. And people are, you know, fundamentally very keen on AI, but they don't know what is happening. They just think that they have a positive attitude towards it, which is good. But the report clearly shows that there is already plenty of applications of AI that are actually having a direct impact on people's lives, of which they're totally unaware. So for me, the first question, in order to help our member states, that was your question, to figure out what is needed, it is to understand that there are already applications of AI that impact people's lives without any democratic debate of it, and with possible human rights implications or impact on their lives, which is not debated democratically. So for me, the first very important, or one of the very important takeaways is that you need to frame that in a democratic debate. And yes, this probably will lead us to consider rules, so that applications such as the one we saw on determination through physical traits of, for instance, sexual orientation should be indeed banned and not be used. So this is, we definitely need rules. There are things that should not be able to be pursued, but that requires a democratic debate in our societies.
Great. So thinking about then the democratic debate and people needing to be aware, I mean, often, as you say, the companies are developing technology that we don't even know about or that they're not able to talk openly about. And so coming then to you, Natalie, and thinking about then how can we drive forward ethical technology when often the companies are not being open about what they're developing, or as we've seen in the case of Google this week, that the ethics that are being driven from within are often actually being driven out in many cases.
Yeah, that's a very sore topic, and I think there are a few things to distinguish there. So we talk a lot about ethics of AI, and some people are mentioning that there is this ethics washing ongoing, which is a term that is called for companies, organizations that are trying to push away regulation by saying that no, we'll just make sure we're ethical. And I don't think it's a right approach to dismiss ethics like that, because you need both, right? You need to make sure that ethical rules are complied with. Some of these rules will also need to be enshrined in legislation, others not. So it's about finding that balance. Obviously, corporations have a specific goal in mind. They create services and products that are valuable for consumers. At the same time, they maximize profit. That is their legitimate goal. So the interests of citizens and consumers will not always be aligned with the interests of corporations, by definition. And where we see that these interests will diverge or even collide, that is where you will need some sort of regulatory action, because you cannot trust, by definition, because of their goal, that these corporations will do what is aligned in the interest of consumers. And we do need, however, all stakeholders around the table. I don't think we should vilify these corporations necessarily, but we need to ask very critical questions, and the change needs to also come from within. And I think the Council of Europe is doing that very nicely with the CAHI, for instance, because you have all stakeholders around the table. And I guess, the example of this week has also shown that one of the issues to maybe put on the table is protection of whistleblowers who do make noise when something happens in a corporation that should not, because that's why we also need people inside, not just outside.
Absolutely. I mean, AI is driven by the people that are making it. And there's some incredible examples of AI innovation. New examples come out every week about the wonderful things that it's doing, and it's driving forward all sorts of things in COVID. So it's a really interesting point that you make there around needing to bring the companies to the table as well as the regulators. And so thinking then about that, Karin, I wonder if I can come to you and ask then, regulation is often talked about in terms of curbing the actions of companies. How perhaps, can regulation incentivize more beneficial uses of AI? Can it lead to companies wanting to do societally positive things with their technology?
Okay. I'm talking from a social scientist perspective. I think, and I'm speaking only for myself, but I think there's a lot has been done with companies supporting them. There's a lot of guidelines, there is a lot of ethics code and charter that has been developed, how to develop responsible or good AI. I think what could be done is to support the people who would be affected by the use of AI. So instead of maybe regulating AI, maybe regulating the use of AI. And I think it's already done in some countries. So it will be, for example, using a concept like, transparency, inclusiveness, and participation. And instead of talking about responsible AI, talking about accountable AI, maybe this would be interesting, because in the conversation right now, we are talking a lot about the needs of the company, how to support, how to frame their development. Maybe it will be interesting to focus on the people who will be affected. And this is what Tanya film is speaking about. How, because basically when you talk about, when you have a human right perspective, and when you talk to people who has been affected, for example, has been kicked out of social welfare because of predictive algorithm, for example, how these people don't know why they have been kicked out, for example. They don't know why kind of decision have been taken. They don't know anything about the fact behind this decision, and they don't have any possible appeal to contest this decision. So I think we'll still need to be accountable, to have accountable use of AI in our society. We need to put governance processes in place to strengthen the citizen and how they can, contest some decision, for example.
Oh, well, I'll come back to you then, Claudia, when we talk about governance and, I mean, all of these terms, responsible AI, ethical AI, trustworthy AI, and what does accountability look like? How can governance help make these phrases into true reality? Be really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it takes two. This time, you have to have the citizens. In order to hold the governments to account, citizens must first of all understand what's happening. So a huge part here is for literacy. Again, the Italian and other countries' examples show that there is very little knowledge of this even happening, let alone understanding. So literacy is a big part of that. And then there needs to be a very conscious effort by the governments and those who decide and have power to include a very diverse type of discussion. So not only, we've already said, we need different stakeholders around the table, but we need to make sure that different parts of the population that are affected differently by AI applications are included in the debate. So this is not left to an elite of people who understand it and work on AI. So stakeholders very much, but again, in order to hold somebody with power to account, you need to have knowledge, and citizens need to be informed. They need to be able to take the decisions. So accountability goes together with inclusion in a debate and literacy and being able to understand what is happening. Again, there are very interesting recommendations coming from this particular report, but the aim of the Council of Europe, of course, is to move this one step higher and actually oblige countries to a certain course of action in order for those applications to be only beneficial and not harmful for societies and individuals.
Absolutely, we need action right at the highest levels, and we need citizens to be aware, and that's really where film can come in and play a role. So to round out this section, I'll come back to you, Tonya. You know, the film is a way for people who've never even thought about AI, who might not even be aware of how AI shapes their own daily lives, to come in. But I really want to challenge you here and say, well, you know, what you've seen in the film is that the line between human and machine is sort of dissolving. And a question from your perspective of all of the people that you've interviewed, you know, we're talking about rules and binding laws. Do we need to define, you know, human rights we have defined? Do we need to define what it means to be human itself in order to work into this future? It's a hard question.
Yeah, that is a hard question. It's a good one. And yes, definitely. But I just, you know, I mean, it's great to hear what Claudia is saying about, you know, it kind of really starts with us. What does it mean to be human in this digital age? It means that we have to develop a new way of critical thinking. We also should take back responsibility of our own data and demand transparency for how this data is being used. And then we do need awareness so that we can put pressure on our local governments, national governments, and international institutions. And the fact is that, you know, we are really today facing this AI race between huge nations like the US and China and huge tech companies. And in this race, ethical standards and human rights are far behind. And so is Europe. So it's this really dangerous gap, I think, when you leave technology to technologists and when private companies have more power and spend more money on AI development than entire nations. So that is just, you know, the main fight I think that we are standing against today is deciding how much power should companies really have over our daily lives. And it's important to keep in mind here that these companies, these tech giants, are often run by a few very, very wealthy, rich young men who make decisions that affect most of our humanity. and who then sets the standards for, our human rights and our democracies? So that is my answer. I don't know if did I cover what you were aiming for, Amy?
A great point to leave us with, a great thought there about who is actually in control, who's holding the code. So we'll move there then into the next clip that we have of iHuman to shape the discussion a bit further. So Yannick, over to you.
Thank you. And Claudia, I will ask just after the broadcast of the second excerpt to Patrick Penanx to join the panel, but I will ask him at that moment. So stay tuned. I will just launch the second excerpt of iHuman. During that time, please continue to use Slido. We will launch another poll because, as you may see, there is a kind of cloud of word about the question, if machines can do it all, what does it mean to be human? The biggest word I see on my screen is to have genuine emotions. So I think it's already quite inspiring as answer. And we will launch the second poll and, of course, the second excerpt. Stay tuned.
Google has every amount of information available. They track people by their GPS location. They know exactly what your search history has been. They know your political preferences. Your search history alone can tell you everything about an individual, from their health problems to their sexual preferences. So Google's reach is unlimited.
So we've seen Google and Facebook rise into these large surveillance machines. And they're both actually ad brokers, which sounds really mundane, but they're high-tech ad brokers. And the reason they're so profitable is that they're using artificial intelligence to process all this data about you and then to match you with the advertiser that wants to reach people like you for whatever message.
One of the problems with technology is it's been developed to be addictive. The way these companies design these things is in order to pull you in and engage you. They want to become essentially a slot machine of attention. So you're always paying attention, you're always jacked into the matrix, you're always checking.
When somebody controls what you read, they also control what you think. You get more of what you've seen before and liked before because this gives more traffic, and that gives more ads. But it also locks you into your echo chamber, and this is what leads to this polarization that we see today.
Jair Bolsonaro, Brazil's right-wing populist candidate sometimes likened to Donald Trump, winning the presidency Sunday night in that country's most polarizing election in decades.
Welcome to Patrick Penanx, Head of Information Society Department, to this part of the chat and of the panel. Of course, we are still with Tonier, Amy, Karin, and Natalie. And as you see in that excerpt of the documentary, one thing, almost a lot, which seems interesting and striking, is that the job of Google and Facebook is to be ad brokers and not really search engines and social media. They are now making money with that. So my first question, and I will begin with Tony, how AI systems today contribute to shape opinion and social media platform? What is their exact role now?
So the exact role of the social media platforms.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, I think that, part of the problem that we are seeing with social media today is that it is run by these tech companies that are part of what I call, or Shoshana Zuboff calls, surveillance capitalism, that I truly believe rings true for what we're seeing in society today. Here we're almost under a kind of a new algorithmic world order where tech companies pretty much decide what information we get about what is going on in the world. And they do so by advertisement and creating echo chambers where we always see things that we like, so that we always stay for as long as possible on their platforms, so that we are served more and more commercials, so we become super consumers. And the way that they do this is that they always track us. They know pretty much everything about us. And it is also so important to realize that, AI today is fueled by our data. And data is a commodity. And what these tech companies are doing in the system is that, they have sort of a market of our minds. So it is our very identities that are being hunted down. And people don't realize how the social media platforms are, manipulating us this way. We are now luckily seeing that there is some awareness, and especially with the younger generation, which gives me a lot of hope. But we are just starting to build that awareness, and we have a really big job to do.
Yeah, really, because you exactly mentioned that, is that there is no secret plan or a secret plot. This is not the point. The point is that their role is to have a good profiling of person, to deliver ads to person. And this is a kind of indirect effect. And my second point about that is also how it could lead to a kind of addiction, because they want to keep people connected. And is it really a behavior like drugs?
Well, it definitely releases some of the same dopamine that some drugs do. And I think that we can all agree, even if we have children or not, that we are all addicted to our technologies today. Personally, I don't know what I would do without my phone or Google. But also looking at my teenage girls, how much time they are spending on these platforms is terrifying. And it's been really interesting working on this film and seeing, how people are talking about AGI or artificial intelligence that will become smarter or just as smart as humans. But in some ways, maybe we've already been outsmarted by this technology, because it's definitely made us addicted to these digital rabbit holes that we can't seem to get out of.
Natalie, do you think that human rights framework or law have something to do to try to find some limits about that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's also important to clarify that there are already laws today that apply to some of these situations. So we're not in a complete legal vacuum. However, there are some legal gaps. And I think really now is the time to try to assess what these legal gaps are and what are then the best mechanisms to tackle them. And let me give you an example. In the video extract, we saw indeed that data of individual people is being used basically to manipulate them, right? To polarize people, etc. But this goes beyond individual harm, right? This is actually a societal harm, the way you could call it. The problem is that current human rights law, like data protection law, in theory, should provide some protection, because you should have some level of control of what happens with your individual data. But this is not just about individuals, right? It's harm to society. So we need some further action, because first of all, individuals don't always know that their data is being used in such a way. There is an asymmetry of information and an asymmetry of power. Now, even assuming that they know, individuals can still consent, and usually they do consent for their data to be used because they need a service. And often it's a fake consent, because if you want to use a service, you need to give your consent. And third, even if they, don't consent to it and they are aware of it, which is already two steps that are, doubtful, they need to be able to have the incentive to go to court. And that's a relatively limited individual harm for a very large cost that it takes you as an individual to go to court. So there is not a lot of chance that individuals will do that. And it's a matter of accumulative individual harm that becomes societal harm. So it's a societal effect. And that's precisely why it's not something you can leave up to individual rights or individuals taking action or not. This is one of these things that affects society as a whole. So where you need society in the form of the public oversight to step in. So that's at least how I think that law should now evolve to tackle some of these legal.
Yeah, Natalie, you're perfectly right. If you see Max Schrems, for instance, this is an individual that goes to a court and fill in a claim. And if you see Cambridge Analytica file, and also it's interesting to see that the harm is very, very small. And about addiction, Natalie, now, this is also a topic which is very interesting because we see that like any system of ads, we try to buy attention. Do you think that this kind of using our bias, our cognitive bias, also could be framed by a law? How do you see that? Because, again, it seems very important to see how using cognitive bias is very usual now for social media platforms.
And this is a very big problem because transparency alone is not enough. I, for instance, know when I scroll on Facebook or on Twitter or on many social media that there are these biases that are being used against me, right? I'm aware of that, and yet I still scroll. So full transparency is not going to help there. We need to think about different types of mechanisms. And that's, again, where I think that you need some sort of public intervention. And where I go back earlier, you need to sit around the table with the developers of these systems, because I think it's very important to realize this is not something that overcomes us. There are human choices behind the design of these systems in such a way. At the end of the day, it's a human being or a corporation that consists still of human beings who decides to develop the technology in such an addictive way. Not something unavoidable. So there is something that can be done about it, and that's a conversation we need to have.
Thanks a lot, Natalie. Karin, following up what just Natalie mentioned about protection of individuals versus this harm on the whole society, what are your views? Do we think today that we have good instruments? We measure really what is the huge impact of digital and artificial intelligence on the whole society?
I think we still need there is a lot of work to do. As I was mentioning before, what I saw is the conversation is basically with states, public institutions, and companies. And you need to include in that conversation, civil society organization and group of people who will be affected by this technology. And I just want to come back to an issue, because I think we focus also a lot on algorithm and predictive policing, but the data issue, this is the fight that we need to have for the next years, because we don't know what kind of data we are collecting, which are collecting, and from who. And this means that if you can be addicted, for example, to a media platform, and you provide a lot of data, you have to keep in mind as a government, for example, that there is some population that do not provide data because they don't have access to internet, for example, because they don't use digital like iPhones or sorry, I'm using an iPhone, so it's not an ad for Apple, but for like a smartphone. And also there is people that don't have digital literacy, meaning that they cannot find it's okay for them to scroll on Instagram or on Facebook, but to be able to understand, to read information on websites. And we see that we saw that with COVID. When you need information, it's more complicated. And also there is a group of people who are wrongly classified into data. People who come from marginalized group, for example, so they are not into the data. So for them, this is not a question of addiction, because even if I don't have even like a free choice and I can not able to give my consent, these people, they have absolutely no choice. They cannot opt out any technology. So this is an issue that I think government states need to address, how you can make sure that these people, underrepresented people into data, are represented, and how you can keep them into the conversation and into the decision-making process.
Yeah, and Karin, I heard yesterday a member of parliament of one European country say that we should not be ludist. This ludist, it was in 19th century in Great Britain. They broke machines, textile machinery, because there is a new change. Do you think that today digital is always a kind of progress? To rephrase my question, do you think that having digital in all public policy is today mandatory to try to solve problems, to solve all the problems?
No, there is we talk about that a lot in Quebec with the COVID, the pandemic, and the techno solutionism. The fact that maybe we need to frame that innovation and this digital technology. Also, I think that any innovation are developed into a context. For example, years ago, implementing artificial intelligence at a large scale wasn't possible. So there is a context that is possible now, and we need to stick on that context and make sure that any development are in line with social and values and social values, social needs too. So no, there's still needs some limits. And as we did with genetics, for example, at some point, cloning was a great innovation and could lead to a very fantastic development for humans. But we have decided as societies that cloning is not available. Maybe this is the kind of stuff we need to do and kind of decision we need to do with artificial intelligence and data. So I will end with that. If we talk about artificial intelligence algorithm, we must talk about data and what the issue behind data, because it will raise and increase inequality a lot.
Of course. Patrick Penanx, we are discussing about media, of course, but is it totally new? Meaning mass media brings a lot of challenges, propaganda, shaping opinion. What is really new, in your opinion, now with social media platform and echo chambers with algorithm and all the hierarchized information?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm old enough to have read 1984, well before 1984. So that basically puts us in a certain light, and I follow the developments as we all do. And I believe that instead of looking at trying to adjust to all the developments that are taking place, that we should possibly have a more visionary approach. That is to see how would you be like our societies to be like in 20 or 30 years, and what are the pitfalls if we want to develop towards such a vision of society. What are the pitfalls that we need to avoid? And I think that's a little bit of a risk management that we're doing with the artificial intelligence right now. Of course, the digital society has meant that a number of things have gone in a much more rapid pace. And in fact, the extract that we have seen does not only point at making sure that companies, what you called are ad brokers, it's also about societal brokers. That is, to which extent certain powers get into power through the use of artificial intelligence and new technologies. So that's important to know. And why is that linked to media and your question? Because obviously, otherwise you will say you didn't answer my question. The issue is the fact that we now have the digital technologies in place allows information to spread, news and information and disinformation, I must say, fake news, disinformation, much more rapidly and much more widely. And that is the intrinsically what differentiates this period of time with previous times.
Yeah, and what are the actions of the Council of Europe now around media? What are the major instruments which are already applicable? Like Nathalie mentioned, we have already some set of instruments.
Well, we've already been discussing regulation. Let's face it, the Council of Europe has always tried to be ahead of the curve. When we discussed 40 years ago automated processing of data, that was really not something that was on top of everyone's mind. As Tonya said, when she was making the film, it was not necessarily top of the agenda. When we discussed 40 years ago the protection of personal data and the automated processing of personal data, that was not on top of the agenda. Just like it was not top of the agenda 20 years ago to speak about cybercrime. So now we're at the phase that we need to be able to look at artificial intelligence applications and need to look at what can be regulated in that. Now, that is not something new. I mean, we've already worked in different fields in the Council of Europe on artificial intelligence aspects. For example, in the media field, but also broader than that, we have been working on the use of algorithms in the manipulative consequences and uses of algorithms with regards to human rights. And this is something that we continue to do. It's actually the topic of our ministerial conference that we will be having in June next year in Nicosia.
So the transition to the next chat is just perfect, because we will discuss about what kind of regulation we can have. Juliette will be the moderator of that part. Just before I will launch the last extract of the documentary about that, and I will also conclude the current poll, and I will open a new poll during the broadcast of the last excerpt of the documentary. Thanks a lot, Patrick, for being with us. And Jan Kleijsen will join the panel just after the broadcasting of the last excerpt.
It's popular now in the US to do predictive policing. So what they do is they use an algorithm to figure out where crime will be. And they use that to tell where we should send police officers. So that's based on a measurement of crime rate. So we know that there's bias. Black people and Hispanic people are pulled over or stopped by the police officers more frequently than white people are. So we have this bias data going in. And then what happens is you use that to say, oh, here's where the cops should go. Well, the cops go to those neighborhoods, and guess what they do? They arrest people. And then it feeds back bias data into the system. And that's called a feedback loop.
So from global surveillance, we've passed now to an even more intrusive way to controlling people. And as we see what AI pretends to be able to do, and when we know what it really is able to do, I think there is maybe a first question to raise. Maybe I will turn to Tonya for this question. How may we know what AI is really able to realize, and how do we know if it is trustfully?
That's another really brilliant question. And part of what I am really concerned about when it comes to the development of AI is that so much of it is done with complete secrecy. So that goes back to the importance of demanding transparency today, because we don't really know what kind of AI is developed in companies around the world. So, how do we then know to trust the systems that come out? And how can we actually know what kind of AI systems are actually running under the currents of our societies? And one of the things that for me was really striking when I started doing research around iHuman was to see that even though we haven't solved the basic issues of how AI is enhancing our bias in the data sets that we are programming it with, and how this leads to further discrimination in our societies. Before we have solved this issue of bias, and also the issue of the black box problem, and that is the problem where we cannot for sure determine how the algorithm came to the conclusion that it came. I mean, that is put pretty simply. But the black box problem and the problem with bias, to me, are really, really basic. And I would just assume that there should be some kind of standard of international law that says that, you know, you have to solve these issues before you basically imply AI systems in societies around the world.
Thank you. Another kind of question, and I'll turn now to Natalie. The difference has been drawn before between AI systems and the use of AI systems. And as we've seen in the documentary with the police is not producing AI systems, it's only using AI systems. And in a way, the police depends on the solidity of the systems, but the police also have to be aware that the way it uses has a tremendous importance too. And we have two fields of regulations, of two possibilities to regulate that, ethic and law. What is your opinion on how this can be articulated, especially in the field of predictive policing?
Yeah, so as I already said, I think it's going to be really crucial that we find the right balance between those things where ethical guidelines would suffice and those aspects which really touch the core of our society. And I'm thinking of especially human rights, democratic values, and rule of law. Those kind of applications are too important if these values are affected to leave just to ethics. So that's the first important point. In your question, a second important point is raised. And I think that's the fact that the boundary between the public use of AI and the private use of AI is actually very vague. And that's in two ways, right? You have public officials, public services, when they want to make use of AI, most of the time they need to rely on the private sector in order to have data, in order to have the AI system. So there is a dependency on the private sector. Conversely, we also see that the private sector has become more and more public sometimes. If you think of social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, etc., these are run by private companies. But because we use them also to express and shape our political opinions, in a way, they've become part of the public sphere. So there is a mismatch because they are the private sphere, but they are operating as if it's the public sphere without having the public scrutiny that public players have. So something is not fully right there, so to say. And that's something that we need to look into a bit closer. And maybe just to come back also to Tanya's point on the black box and to, in your question, the fact that there is a difference between the AI system and the use of the AI system. Sometimes the black box is used a little bit as an excuse by some AI developers to say, look, even we don't know how this works, so how can we take responsibility for that, right? However, if we're going to focus on the use of AI systems, the black box excuse does not work anymore. Because even if we don't know how the system exactly takes its decision, we can, however, find out with proper transparency what was the purpose of the AI system, what was it built for, what type of data was used, how was the data cleaned, how did they collect the data, how did they store the data, which type of verification and training did the system undergo, was there a testing on bias, and how is the system used within the organization? As a second opinion, is it really relied upon, is someone looking at it? And all these things, they are not part of the black box. They are something that we can have transparency about, if only we get it from the companies or the organizations that use them. I think it's our collective responsibility as a society to demand such transparency whenever values like human rights, democracy, or the rule of law are at stake. And that's, I think, a role for also legal action.
Thank you, Natalie. Next questions. I think predictive policing is at the very core of what we can call social justice. And on this aspect, I wanted to have the opinion of Karin. All these discriminations that take place, and we know that they take place, we know that they are committed and that they are deepened and repeated. And how is it possible to draw a red line to these discriminations? How is it possible to take the positive line of artificial intelligence out of it?
Very interesting question. I think maybe to do algorithm and data assessment will be interesting, and to include, once again, to include into that conversation civil society organization and citizen who will be affected. I think they may be the one who will know the best what the consequences will be on them if they know what kind of algorithm and data has been used, which mean that I agree with Natalie said. Also, in discrimination and in that kind of issue, human rights issue, I think one of the blind spots I see is that we don't talk about gender, we don't talk about race, and racism, but also we don't talk about power relation. And this is clearly an issue that we need to address in order to then address discrimination. Because when you come from marginalized group, when you are Black women and you already be discriminated, the fact that police and welfare use predictive policing will affect you twice or three times more than white women, for example. So this, I know that this is not a conversation that you're having in Europe, gender and race, but this is definitely something that we are having here. And I see.
You do have to, unfortunately.
Yeah. But in the data, this is an issue. But this is clearly an issue that we need to talk. A power relation, and I'm not even talking about power relation between global North and global South. Even in our countries, Western countries, this is an issue that we need to address, and to be honest and frank and transparent about that. And maybe we could talk about discrimination, but also, and once again, sorry to be a broken record this morning, but or this afternoon for you, but to include people affected by this algorithm and data will be the first step for me to address discrimination issue.
Thank you so much. To close the discussion on regulation, Jan Claesen has joined us. Jan is a director at the Council of Europe. Jan, could you tell us how to frame an international, or at least here in Strasbourg, a European framework in order to regulate artificial intelligence? What are the projects at the Council of Europe at the moment?
Thank you very much, Juliette. Allow me for a moment to greet all the participants, in particular the students from Lycée de Pontonnier, where my 3 children were educated. So I'm very happy to have the Pontonnier participating in this meeting. Hello to you all. Perhaps thank you very much for the questions. Also very good to see Natalie, Karin here, and very pleased to meet Tonya, and compliments for the documentary. A few words perhaps why we're doing it in the first place. Ethical charters were mentioned for risky technologies, but they have at least 4 big disadvantages, which I think we should really keep in mind. Ethical charters for AI, 1, are not binding. Secondly, they do not give you a remedy to go to court. You can't invoke an ethical charter in court. Thirdly, they do not provide legal certainty. Some companies may apply them or may apply them at some time and others not. They differ between companies, and therefore also they do not provide a level playing field for companies to operate. Secondly, it was said that in addition to ethical charters, we already have general human rights law. We have legal standards. We have criminal law. But when it comes to high-risk applications of technology, we do not wait in our societies for things to go wrong and then expect people to go to court. Think about pharmaceuticals. We don't not want people, or we not wait for people to die because the medicine was not properly tested, and then say, oh yes, but if you die from it or you get very ill, you can always go to court because something was wrong with it. No, we actually regulate it beforehand. Think of aviation. We do not expect the company to put an aircraft in service and the passengers to take it, hoping that the aircraft will actually fly. There are very strict criteria for it to do so. Services, take the banking sector. By the way, also a very good counter-argument to those who invoke the black box. I think many of us have no idea what goes on in a banker's mind, just as we have no idea what goes on in an AI black box. But banking is very tightly regulated. So I think this is perhaps a little analogy we can keep in mind. So there are very good reasons to fill the legal gaps, to go much beyond ethics, because AI applications can have very big impact on our daily lives. Whether it's, we saw the example of predictive policing in the documentary, facial recognition, of course, is a very big issue. But also think about, for instance, federal job agencies. There was a case in a member state of the Council of Europe where it was found that the federal job agency was hugely discriminating against single mothers and disabled people. And it turned out this was because the algorithms, it was an AI-run system, and the algorithms were hugely biased. So both gender in this case and against people with disabilities, to rejoin Karin Johnsley concerns here. So there are very good reasons that we not wait for things to go wrong, but regulate it in advance. The Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe has set work in motion. At the end of this month, a meeting will take place, actually next week, a meeting will take place in Strasbourg, where an answer will be given to the question, is it possible to come up with a treaty for AI, to set some binding rules? I very much hope that the answer for the arguments I just mentioned will be a positive one. If that is the case, then hopefully, or not hopefully, then we will be able to start negotiations next year on such binding principles, because they are really urgently needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And I hope too that you will have the possibility to draw a treaty. That would be very good. Good luck. So now I'll give the floor back to Yannick, and we will have a larger audience.
We can just make a point about what we have on Slido, and just the last poll was very also interesting, because we are discussing about regulators, and as Jan mentioned, we have action to take at international and national level. The last question in Slido is interesting, but on the point of view from citizens, what action would you suggest citizens take to help shape our AI future for good? And one word that is in the answers is education. And for me, it's a perfect transition with Lycée des Pontonniers, with international school that is with us. And I would like to thank warmly Professor Robin Knockhart, who managed a group of high school students during last weeks. They work on the documentary, and I think they are the generation that we have to cope with this technology. And I will give the floor to Robin just to raise some questions with students who are with us. Robin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. As you've said, I'm an English teacher here at Pontonnier International High School in Strasbourg, and I speak for my listening students both in this room and another room when I thank you for including us in this excellent discussion. Our high school brings together students from all around the world, from Europe, but also from Africa, from Asia, from the Americas, and from the Middle East. And so consequently, although it's a cliche, that we really do have the feeling that they represent the future global generation, which will have to deal with the risks and benefits of artificial intelligence. And we've thoroughly enjoyed preparing for today's discussion. Consequently, I thank you and the whole panel as we move into our 3 questions, which will be proposed one after the other.
Yes, we are very happy to hear the first question.
Thank you.
What values and individual human rights do you think Europe is already sacrificing in the AI race?
How could AI machine have a positive or a negative impact on climate change?
Okay. And the third question.
Regardless of current regulations, should humanity explore all possible potentials of artificial intelligence? And if not, then which areas should remain as mysteries?
Were all three of those questions clearly enough enunciated?
I hope so. Maybe the second one was, maybe you can repeat the second one. Or...
Second one.
No.
How could AI machines have an impact, have a positive or negative impact on climate change?
And so the second question concerns climate change and the possibility that AI could help us to reduce the effects of climate change.
Climate change. Very, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Our speakers might be inspired by the one or the other question. So feel free, please, to take the floor and to give some answers to our young people.
Tonya could start. Tonya, you could start, maybe.
Thank you so much for your wonderful, wonderful questions. And thank you so much for watching the film and participating today. I think for me, young people are the most important audience of the film and also of this discussion. Now, the first question was, what ethical standards are we losing in Europe with AI today? Is that correct?
It was what values and individual human rights do you think Europe is already sacrificing in the AI race?
Yes. So one of my biggest concerns is that ethical standards and human rights don't have a very strong place in the AI race that we now are in particularly seeing between the US and China and the big corporations. Now, luckily, I think that here in Europe, we are kind of taking a pioneering role. And I'm so happy to hear that Jan is saying that, next year already, we will have possibly a binding treaty. So that is really, really good news. One of my concerns when it comes to the ethical standards that we are losing in this race is our diversity. And is making sure that, our privacy is protected and taken care of as a valuable human right, and as well as decreasing discrimination as much as possible in our society, which we are now seeing with really efficient sort of AI systems. The opposite is taking place, where we see maybe that they are enhancing discrimination. And then it's total surveillance. What are we losing with human rights when we are under total surveillance? And I think that's also something we've seen with COVID now, how governments have systems of total surveillance already in place. So that is something that I am personally very concerned about. I'm sorry, and do you want me to continue with all the questions, or should we throw the ball over to somebody else?
Maybe we throw the ball to Natalie.
Shall I maybe try to tackle the second question then, to go chronologically, or?
As you like, Natalie, just as you like.
Yeah, so maybe, because the second question was about climate change, if I understood well. And I think that's, of course, a huge topic today for everyone. And it's, again, a societal concern, because it doesn't just affect people who live today. It affects people who are not even born today and who will be born into this world, and a world that will look very differently also because of the technology. I think AI is often said to be something that can help us solve climate change. And I think it's really important that we just take a step back and think what that means. If we, just as an experiment, substitute the word AI with advanced data analytics, which often is what it is, we get a better sense of what that means. So AI is not a miracle solution. It's not going to help solve climate change just like that, like a god could do that. But because of the strong data analytics that AI can bring, recognition of patterns, for instance, of deforestation or of temperature changes, it can lead us towards those points where we need to take more human action as well. Right? So it's again up to humans more than up to the technology, but we humans can use the technology in a wise way in order to gain the necessary information to take the right action. So that's a way in which AI can help. On the other hand, and that's also something that in the documentary was shown really well, AI systems, especially when they analyze data, they rely on huge data centers, huge data stores, which take a huge amount of energy. So we need to be very careful that we're not too much carried away by all the good things that technology can give us, if at the same time we're also giving up a lot of environmental good in order to make these machines function in the first place. So we need to think very carefully also about the environmental impact of AI systems and the data centers.
Thank you, Natalie. Karin, would you like to add something to the questions?
The question about the climate change and maybe then the third question, but I will need a little refresh of the third question. But about the climate change, yes, I will just follow what Natalie said, and also not taking AI like the magical solution, especially when you look at the asymmetrical relation between global south and north, meaning that most of the development happening in the north have consequences in the south about the pollution. So maybe it could help, because of the traveling, it could help countries from the global north, but we have to think about more globally and also to think about people in the global south, meaning what does it mean for them instead of non-traveling or to receive, because some states in global south have they receive the déchets. I don't know how to say that in English, but from northern country. Rubbish, yes. So, if we are going to produce more rubbish because of AI and data centers, and we ship it to southern countries, it's not going to help, the global climate change crisis. So, yeah. Maybe if I can have a little refresh for the third question.
For the third question, if we were to ignore our current regulations about this technology, should we explore all the possible potentials of artificial intelligence? And if not, then if not, then which areas should we leave as mysteries?
Do we need to have mystery? Because of AI? I don't think so. If it's your question, I think this is some choice that as societies we have to make, what should remain mystery and what shouldn't remain mystery. And I think especially because of the impact of AI on human rights and the irreparable impact on human rights, we shouldn't have mystery, and we shouldn't allow any black box, and find any kind of assessment, regulation, and governance processes to make sure that we address this mystery and solve it, and make sure that any users of AI are in line with our collective values and social values. So innovation for innovation, I don't think this is something that we need to to do. As human society, we never allowed that, and this is now I think we are at the crossroads, and we need to decide what should be allowed. And for example, there is a large consensus on the fact that facial recognition could be a threat and is not accurate, discriminates a large group of population, especially non-white population, which is basically a larger number of people across the world, and also that there is a very severe harm on human rights, basic human rights. So, yeah, I won't allow. As a social scientist, I think we have to control any innovation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions, and we look forward to listening to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very good to have young people with us in these kinds of reflection.
Thanks a lot, Juliette, and thanks a lot again, Robin, to have been with us and asking some questions. I will go now and I will turn to the chat where we have collected a lot of questions. I would like to thank you, thank our audience for that, because we have really a very strong engagement. And of course, I will not be able to ask you all the questions that we have gathered, but I will try to sum up with one word. It's a question of trust. For instance, this one, how can we be sure that artificial intelligence are actually being used for good? Another one about transparency, how we know what goes behind the scene. Another one about what could be the further research in academia when talking about artificial intelligence and human rights. And to conclude, another one about how to ensure human in the loop is really a part of the process in case of automatic decision made by public authority. And to conclude, certification of artificial intelligence system before the deployment could be a solution, ? So first element, a question of trust, and those certification could be a part of this answer. Tonier, I give you the floor first.
Thank you so much. Excellent questions. I do think that the issue of trust is, definitely at the core of what we're facing with AI. And for me, this is about governance. We need some responsible adults to take charge and prioritize cooperation rather than like market forces, and prioritize human rights in pretty hard regulations on how we will deal with this technology. That is the first on my list. The second is that we have to limit the power of big tech corporations today. In order to build trust in our AI systems, we need to make sure that the tech giants are not the ones that are leading this narrative and leading the AI development. So that is also maybe also on my first, but they kind of go together. And thirdly, I also think that we need to prioritize actually spending a lot more money on developing our own AI systems, where we are not reliant on the cheapest, most efficient, and best AI systems that are out there today. And when we released iHuman here in Norway, we had a lot of special events with government institutions and departments that were working on AI regulations, and talking to the police force here, what that, had to, or not had to, but ended up buying Palantir, which we also look at in the film. And just to say very briefly, Palantir is a company that was developed by Peter Thiel in the US after 9/11. and comes very much out of that sort of right-wing fear tactic. But Palantir is extremely efficient. And what, the takeaway from the Norwegian police is that they're given the mandate from the Norwegian government to go out and buy the most efficient, cheapest, and best systems out there. And what they are then left with are systems from Israel, the US, and China. So what we really got to do, I believe, here in Europe and also maybe nationally, is to put more money into AI development to make sure that we develop systems that are protecting our democracy and our human values. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tony, for this very inspiring answer, indeed. Natalie, from your side, question of trust, possibility of certification, and following up what Tony just mentioned, how can we guarantee that human rights today in digital era are protected?
Yeah, let's start with the trust. Indeed, so it's a word we're using a lot, right? In AI, trustworthy AI, also with the high-level expert group, we used it. It's not an uncontested term, because some people, for instance, say the word trust is something purely human. So it's even wrong to say trustworthy AI because we should never trust machines. It's not something that can be trusted. And there's a point there, but that's not what we mean when we talk about trustworthy AI, right? We don't say we should blindly trust AI systems. Rather, it's about the humans behind the system. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. And the second thing is that trust needs to be earned. You cannot just trust something or someone from one day to another, right? And this earning can be done when you can demonstrate your trustworthiness. And that's where I think we can make a connection to certifications and standardizations and also impact assessments mandated by regulation, because all these things give you a means, a tool in order to demonstrate some trustworthiness. And I think that's something that we should keep in mind, right? How can we create mechanisms in order to demonstrate that laws are being complied with and that we don't just have to assume that this is the case, which can often not be so. Then to the point that we can never really be sure that, when we ask for transparency, we're getting what we're asking for, that people will actually follow these regulations. That's true, but we can never be sure about anything in a way, We can also not be sure that people commit crimes. Does it stop us from regulating that? No. We still adopt laws that prevent people from killing other people, from stealing. We know that sometimes this will still happen, but that doesn't mean we're not adopting laws, right? There will never be 100% perfect enforcement, but it doesn't mean that we should not adopt laws. I think maybe finally, for the human in the loop, because I think that was also an interesting point, we don't need a human in the loop probably for every single decision. But for the important decisions where there can be an impact on an individual's life, yes, we do. But we need to think very carefully about what that means. It shouldn't mean that a human being has, 1 second to go over a decision and decide yes or no whether I follow it. That is not meaningful human review. And that, in fact, means we need to rethink a little bit society. Because if in our society we're just caring about efficiency, then human review doesn't mean anything. Because it's something that just has to be done as soon as possible until you move to the next decision. So we need to think very carefully about what it means to have meaningful review and how we think about these things in our society. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Natalie. Karin, following up Natalie's answer, I let you the floor.
Yeah, certification, I think this is probably where we should go, just to make sure that we have, proper assessment on human rights. What I think also could be done is also to document, the violation digital, violation of human rights, but also to have at least what is digital rights, because basically I don't know, and I work mostly in the field, so this is difficult to have a map of the kind of right that could be violated because of the use of algorithm or data. So maybe for people, it would be interesting to know about their rights and what kind of abuse they could face instead. So build capacity of people would be interesting. And this is exactly in line with what I said before, meaning that we talk a lot about companies and state, but I think we need to address the people need and how to build their capacities and their understanding of what this AI is and how is it used. So it's also, for further research to focus on that, to document. So I'm calling on my social scientist colleague, please do some research on the impact, social and societal impact. Gosh, this is a hard word to say for example. Work on that, this impact. Also, I think we'll still, because I was reading the chat, and there is also an issue of representation of who is talking for who. It's great to have the states. It's great to have, academic, but where these academic come from? And I'm talking, addressing directly what is going on with Google right now and Dr. Gibru, and the fact that, these some academics have raised a red flag for a long time about, discrimination and, for example, for facial recognition. So this is a part of the equation, and this is definitely the part of the solution that we have to find, to have the more diverse and the more different perspective. Because as a white woman, for example, there is a lot of things that I don't know, and I hope that nobody will rely on my word only, but will find other people to talk about other realities. So I will stop there.
I hope you don't mind if I jump in there, Yannick. I think that's a really excellent point. I mean, we are an all-white panel. It's something, diversity is a core issue, but it's also, as iHuman shows, the reality is that the tech is being developed by a very small core of very non-diverse white men. And so actually I see that we still have Jan and Claudia with us. And I wonder if I might throw this question to them and say, we can always do better with diversity. And, as the Council of Europe is developing these policies and guidelines and strategies and looking towards a binding treaty, it would be great to hear from them what strategies are in place to increase diversity in those forms of decision making, and what they're doing to bring diverse representation to the table, so that that policies is made with all of these different voices, and particularly the voices of Black and other ethnic minority groups.
If I may reply directly,
Yes, please.
Yes, sorry, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, just asking politely. Thank you very much. In fact, a multi-stakeholder consultation is foreseen for the results of the CAI, so this feasibility study and the possible legal elements. So the elements for a legal instrument, a treaty in normal English, will be submitted to multi-stakeholder consultation. That is one thing. And by multi-stakeholder, we mean civil society, that is NGOs, academia, and also the private sector. But I would also like to stress that the Council of Europe is not just negotiating at the moment with 47 states, European states. We already have 5 observer countries. We have Canada, United States, Japan, Mexico, and the Holy See at the table. Israel has requested and has been granted the right to participate. And we have recently received a communication from Colombia, so from a country from the global south, that wishes to join these negotiations as well. So I think we're on the right track, but it's absolutely true. I very much share the concern. If we are to establish a global benchmark, it is clear that it cannot be just white boys sitting around the table, not even white boys and girls sitting around the table, but we must definitely open up the consultations. But we are planning to do so.
Any additional thoughts from Claudia on how we can increase diversity?
Well, it's a very difficult job. We must be very humble in that. We're not very good at it. Let's face it. Neither is the Council of Europe nor is the European Union. I think we do not. I've seen on the chat comments which are perfectly right. We do not ourselves represent the new societies that make up our membership. I think we are maybe better at design of what we want to do. We are certainly very attentive to this aspect in two ways. There is a very strong emphasis in the work that has been done and has been quoted on the feasibility study, for instance, on the gender aspect of the impact that AI has on gender equality. So we are very attentive to this aspect, both in making sure that young girls and women are included from day one, and day one is when research starts. And we know very well that young girls and women are not the majority of those developing AI. So we're very attentive to this aspect as we prepare for work in this area, for standards in this area. We're also trying to ensure that in the discussions there is a gender equality rapporteur whose job is to make sure that the language that we use is respective of this aspect. And it's very difficult because even our terminology, as we write things, also legal terms, is gender biased and not in favor of women, if I can say that. So we're trying to be extremely attentive, but we realize that the road ahead is very long and very thorny. Also because some of our member states not all of our member states, let's say, have similar or equal views on this, as you're familiar with the backlash that is out there on the use, for instance, the word gender, on the use of the term gender equality. So again, we're very attentive to these aspects to precisely make sure that whatever comes out of international forum on regulation of AI is fully compatible with very high standards on human rights and women's rights. But it is a challenge, and as I said, it is a challenge to be inclusive. So we should certainly redouble efforts in this area to make sure, as you said, that as we consult so largely, we're also diverse in the ones who are consulted. So both in terms of states, and Jan has explained, outside Europe as well, in terms of kinds of actors that are on the table, but also in the society at large, so that we are really more representative. This is foreseen in the consultation group. Consultation group has pointed out ways in which you can reach out to diverse parts of the society. It is not easy, but this certainly is a task we have beforehand.
Thank you very much for being so kind.
And Amy, we have also Ambassador Lumi, who is again with us. I don't know if he's connected, but maybe we can extend your question also to him.
Sure, go ahead.
So about diversity, it's what Amy just mentioned now. We are creating rules, we are working on instruments, but are we totally representative of the society today? Do we need more diversity in this reflection about regulation of artificial intelligence?
And how can Estonia, at a national level, facilitate that increased diversity?
Maybe first I should ask for clarification in a sense that diversity in what sense here?
Well, particularly thinking about ethnic diversity, we are an all-white panel. How can we as a panel truly speak about, we can't speak to all experiences, and so how do we develop rules and regulations around technology? How do we bring in people who are representative of the whole of society?
Okay, thank you. I don't think I can have a long story around this issue. I can only say that I sincerely believe that it will come around naturally. And what is important here is that I don't think we should try to force it from the point of view of working with the technology. This is now the part of Council of Europe's work that is much more related to promoting education and promoting human rights and protection of migrants and so on. So I'm saying that this is, I think this is not a topic that we should try to view here when we discuss AI and maybe technological developments. This is where we have to pay attention to other areas where the Council of Europe and its member states are doing its work, and I'm pretty convinced that if we do it right in those other areas, then this is how we reach and achieve the diversity also in this field here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador. Amy, I think, and Juliette, I think it's slowly time to conclude, and maybe thanks warmly our speakers, our participants. Thanks again to Ambassador Lumi to have been with us during all the events, and it's clearly an honor for us to have you on board. And again, we will conclude also to thanks Lycée des Pontonniers to have been with us. And I recommend you, I think now to, of course, going and see the documentary as a whole, because it's out in theater in United Kingdom, but also it's broadcasted on some networks. And again, thanks to Tony, thanks to Karin and Natalie to have been with us. Thanks to Claudia and Jan and Patrick from the Council of Europe to have been with us. And Amy, maybe do you have a last word for everybody?
Oh, well, I thought the last word really should go to our panelists. I wondered if we might end on a really positive note and hear one brief thought from everyone on what kind of AI world they want to see. You know, let's think about the positives of this technology. We spend a lot of time talking about the challenges. In a great human-centered AI world, what would that look like for you?
Thanks a lot.
Great. From my part, I would like to thank warmly all participants too. Our webinar has come to an end, and looking at Tonya's window, it seems like it's already night in Norway. Our next meeting will take place at the beginning of February. The exact date has not been determined for now, but it will be in the first days of February. And we will talk about evidence produced by artificial intelligence in the course of a criminal procedure. How do we deal with AI evidence in a criminal court? So, goodbye to everyone, and we are happy to have spent a fascinating discussion with you all.
Thanks a lot. This webinar has been recorded. It will be broadcasted again on the website of the Council of Europe. And of course, we will insert all the links and the links to, of course, the documentary itself. And thanks again to have shared this extraordinary material with all of us. Bye-bye. Stay safe. See you soon.